Some breeds of dogs, like corgis and Australian shepherds, can actually have a naturally short tail called a natural bobtail. So why are some dogs born with natural bobtails? Well, in order to understand the answer to this question, we first need to go over some basic genetics. In every single cell of a dog's body, they have their genes. And genes are like the instruction manual of the body. They're going to tell the body how to do different things, like what the dog's eye color should be, what the dog's fur color or fur length should be. And then there's also genes that control how a little puppy embryo develops, where those paws should go, where those ears should go, and also how long that tail should be. If we were to zoom in on a dog's genes, just like ours, we would see that they're made up of these 4 different molecules called nucleotides, A, T, G, C, that act like letters that are going to spell out the instruction of what a gene is supposed to do. So the spelling of a gene is very important because that's how that gene knows what its job is. If there's a spelling change in a gene, that could mess up those instructions and that gene can no longer read what its job is and no longer work properly. Going back to our little puppy embryo over here, there's actually a gene that controls how long the spine should be and therefore how long the tail should be, and that is the T gene. This is a gene that every dog has. They actually have 2 copies of it because they have 2 copies of every single gene in their body. They get 1 copy from their mother and 1 copy from their father. Some dogs are born with a mutation or a spelling mistake in 1 copy of their T gene that causes that copy to no longer work because it can't read those instructions anymore because of that spelling mistake. So even though these dogs have a backup copy from their other parent that is spelled just fine, it's like having half of their instructions on tail length. And so dogs with a mutation in 1 copy of their T gene, they are going to have a shorter tail than average, sometimes even no visible tail at all. The common spelling mistake that a lot of different dog breeds have in their T gene is the C.189 C to G. This is like an address on the gene, and it's supposed to be read as 189 letters into the start of that T gene. Instead of the letter C, there was the letter G. That greater than sign is supposed to be read as an arrow. This 1 letter difference is enough to completely cause that gene to no longer work properly anymore. A common way this mutation is reported on canine genetic testing is as CG or CC. This just means that 1 copy of the dog's T gene has the letter G instead of the letter C, and the other copy is spelled normally with the letter C. CC just means that both copies of the dog's gene are spelled with the C as expected. That is a really great question, Dr. Rowland. And that is because of a concept in genetics called variable expressivity. That means that the same exact gene mutation is going to affect dogs differently. They're going to have varying tail lengths. So look at Mr. Waffles here. He is a natural bobtail mixed breed that has a very, very short nub for a tail, whereas our friend Mac here, he's an Australian shepherd. He has a natural bobtail, but his tail is quite long compared to Mr. Waffle. So there's going to be varying tail lengths. This is another example with Cooper the Aussie. His tail is medium length. He's a natural bobtail. And the same with Penny from Germany. She's a natural bobtail with a medium length tail. But do all dog breeds with natural bobtails have this gene mutation, and how common is it? Before we answer this question, if you're enjoying this video so far, please make sure to subscribe and smash that like button. It really helps us know if we should make more videos like this. Do all dog breeds with natural bobtails have this gene mutation, and how common is it? A 2009 study looking at 23 different dog breeds known to have natural bobtails only saw this mutation in 17 of them. So this tells us that 6 breeds, we still haven't discovered the genes yet that are causing them to have these natural bobtails. A 2019 study by Drager et al. Looked at the prevalence of certain physical traits in 11,790 dogs tested through Wisdom Panel. There were a total of 212 dog breeds and 4 wild canines represented on this, and they found that the natural bobtail gene mutation, the C.189C to G mutation, was present in 48 different breeds. The 4 most common breeds with this mutation were the Tenterfield Terrier, with 30% of dogs having this mutation, the Swedish Valhund at 18%, the Spanish Water Dog at 14%, and the Australian Shepherd with 13% of Aussies having this natural bobtail. Going back to our friend Mr. Waffles over here, if we were to look at his genetic test results, you would see that he was a mix of a lot of different breeds and very likely has this natural bobtail gene mutation. And scrolling down to his predictive traits, sure enough, they saw this very specific change in the T gene, meaning that he has that natural bobtail. If you were to adopt a dog, though, from a shelter with a short tail, and you did this testing, and Embark did not predict that this dog had a natural bobtail, it doesn't necessarily mean that your dog did not have a natural bobtail and that its tail was docked or amputated at any point. It could very well be due to a gene we haven't discovered yet that is causing those natural bobtails, especially if your dog has ancestry in one of those 6 breeds that we previously mentioned. What if 2 dogs with natural bobtails have puppies together? Then what happens? We already said that dogs have 2 copies of every gene in their body. That's because they get one from each parent, so parents can only pass on 1 copy of a gene. If we have 2 parents that have a natural bobtail, that means that 1 copy has a mutation, the other copy of their T gene does not. So when they have puppies together, they can only pass on 1 copy. So we can have the following situations happen. Dad passes on his normal copy of the T gene, mom passes on her normal copy of the T gene. That puppy only has working copies of the T gene, therefore has a normal tail, no bobtail. Or mom could pass on her copy of the T gene with a mutation, dad could pass on his normal copy, and this puppy would have a natural bobtail. Or mom could pass on her normal copy of the T gene, dad could pass on his copy with a mutation, and this puppy too would also have a natural bobtail. But then you could get a scenario where both parents pass on their copy of the T gene that has the mutation. This puppy has no working copies of the T gene. This gene is not just important for tail length, it's also important for spinal length and spinal development. So puppies that don't have any working copies of this gene, they have severe spinal defects and birth defects, and they most likely will die in utero and never make it to birth. This is called lethal in utero or homozygous lethal, meaning if they have 2 copies of that gene mutation, no working copies of that gene, it is incompatible with life. There have been a few reports in the literature about puppies born with no working copies of the T gene that make it to birth as stillborns or die shortly afterwards due to the severe birth defects. This is a very, very rare outcome, and that these crosses don't necessarily need to be avoided. And there you have it. Now you're an expert on the genetics of canine natural bobtails. Comment below with any other canine genetics topics you'd like to see us cover in the future.